Hello from Montana, Embodied Anatomy people. This is Liam Bowler, and I'm doing a little video follow-up on Mike Ham's video, my course co-instructor for this course, one of your instructors. If you're taking the course for our 4-day retreat coming up in like 2 weeks in Duval, and I watched Mike's video and that he had made right after a Skype session, and we just had a Skype session a couple of days ago. If you haven't watched Mike's, you can check it out. It was largely to answer the question, sort of what's the feel of this? What are we doing? What are our days like? And he laid out a pretty nice sort of framework for the vision that we're working with right now. So watch that if you'd like to, and you haven't. I wanted to make a video about an example of something we might do, like a kind of activity, or how this anatomy knowledge gets applied. So part of the embodiedness of the embodied anatomy means you can feel it, you sort of know it experientially, you know the anatomy experientially. And another kind of, or rather one expression of that knowing experientially, in my experience, is some fluidity with how these concepts of how a body might work. And I say might because there can be so much, it's so personal, right? You don't need me to tell you, every body is so personal, and that journey can be so personal. But yeah, some of these governing principles that seem to be at least helpful North Stars that you can sort of orient around, to navigate the waters. So one of those activities, I'll frame this by saying it's, I call this I win, you win, and I'll get into it in a second. But reframing strength, I think, you ask anybody on the street, hey, is strength important? Depending on where they're from, but right, it's all one of those things like eating well and flexibility, like sure, that'd be important. I really framing something near and dear to my heart is reframing strength training, not only just like squats and deadlifts and whatever sort of weight training you're doing, or push-ups and pull-ups, and all of that can be great. I do some of that myself, kind of depending on what season of my life I'm in. But also, I think of it as, we're framing this as like asking a question of any given position of the body of, hey, can you, you being this tissue, whatever tissue we're talking about, can you feel this, and can you contract? Can you lean back in that direction? And if the answer is yes, we could say, okay, that has strength, that has a certain vitality. But really, in my experience, so helpful to think beyond just the muscle. Are you strong in pressing? Are you strong in pec major and minor and da-da-da-da? And start getting this feel. Mike mentioned we'll be using an embryological map to, as part of our sort of story about how a body not only unfolds, but is unfolding. So part of that can be, there can be like, if you envision an embryo unfolding, and our continuous unfolding, if that's kind of a line of energy, or near infinite lines of energy, there can be little breaks along those lines, kind of like circuit breakers, with maybe it's kind of a damp fuse, and that can really affect the whole system. So this was sort of a funny example to choose. I was just thinking about it because it's something I do with clients. It's not something I do by myself, but I'm going to show it like this is my client hand, and this is my this is my practitioner hand. And so how I win, you win works, it starts by kind of asking the question of, can you feel, and you can ask it about any given motion or position, especially maybe a joint in question, like let's say this person's shoulder, my client's shoulder. This hand would be asking the question of, hey, can we meet each other in a kind of resistance, in this sort of, it doesn't need to be gritty, and in fact I encourage it a lot of times not to just feel, can we lean into each other? If you've done contact improvisation or dance like tango, which I'm getting into, that feeling of a mutual leaning. So the question might be, we lean into each other, and then remember, this is my client hand. I might say, okay, now start to press into me, and I'm going to let you win. Or, you're going to overtake me, depending on who's bigger, the letting. I definitely work with people who are bigger than me. And then I'll start saying, okay, the same question, keep leaning into me like that, but I'm going to start to win. And in fact, you're going to kind of let me win. I'm not going to use maximal force to kind of plow through anything. And the really interesting thing for me gets to be, and try this with a friend. As I'm pressing, I can often feel spots, not necessarily where the whole thing goes limp and weak. Obviously that would be a big like, whoa, there's something neurologically going on there, let's go maybe in there really slowly. But also places where their arm might just kind of lock up. So they're still resisting, but what I'm feeling for in this practice is if this hand is pushing in with, let's say X amount of force, in the they win situation, they are just greater than X. And when I am winning and moving into, again, it can be an external rotation pattern, abduction, it can be all sorts of things. And in fact, I don't often find it helpful to think of those uniplanar movements. It's very much a, depending on your training, sort of where their tissue is guiding you to ask these questions of, can you meet that, that resistance in a way where if my hand disappeared, their hand would press. And it's interesting because they're both, the movement is the same, but you're feeling for them not just locking up. A lot of times a locked nervous system, if you know of anything about trauma, right, that can be a real response to just sort of like freezing. And there's been some really kind of beautiful work that's come out of this in my sessions, like, whoa, sort of unfreezing tissue. So they'll be pressing, and then I'll feel a spot where it just kind of goes locking. And I can still push through it and win. But what I want to feel, and you can't really see, are if I'm pushing in this way, they're pushing in back. And we're like leaning into each other and moving. If you were thinking about in dancing, like if I had a partner here, when I'm stepping forward into my partner, they don't retreat by stepping back. If you've done a dance like tango, you know this, right? They actually stay leaning into me and step back if I'm leading. If I'm following, vice versa. I stay leaning into them as I take a step back. So this, call it whatever you want, but this I win, I just call it I win, you win. I win, you win work can really ask that strength question, which I'm just putting in quotes because it's not like, okay, let's arm wrestle, can ask that strength question in a way that is actually quite gentle, but in my experience can have really profound effects, not only in the myriad of good things that can happen with a sort of neurological rewiring of an area, but also as I've started doing more of this work, like I'll do this kind of thing with weights and just getting into funny, like, oh, that feels kind of weak, and going there with very light weight. It's been an interesting byproduct of I'm overtly just like stronger by a big shot than I've been, and doing much less of any kind of weightlifting and stuff like that than I used to do. So a pretty cool like spectrum of what benefits that might come out of that. So anyway, again, this is an example of a kind of activity we might do, which is a little funny. We won't be doing it on ourselves, we'll be doing it with each other, but that kind of partner exercise would be sort of an applied way of how, looking at this new map of kind of how the myofascial system unfolds from a midline, and the visceral system and the neural system, and how they are interconnected, and sort of getting not just a different mental picture, but a different sense of when we say like, oh, we're gonna do some strength work, what that even means, that kind of coordination, that different imagery. And again, the point of the course, a lot of that is like you embody that imagery and then have a sense of how to apply it, or a deeper sense, as I imagine everyone watching this video has lots of their own training and skill that you would be bringing to a course like this. So anyway, super look forward to seeing you, the folks that are signed up for this course. And if you're not signed up and you are interested, I'm not sure where all this video will be posted, but it's called Embodied Anatomy, a 4-day retreat. You can shoot me a message or Mike. It's August 24 through 27, an hour outside of Seattle. That's the pitch. Hope to see you there.